Forrest Tucker, the genius who conquered the bars. This man's name is Forrest Tucker. He spent his entire life as a bank robber, pulling off heists at a rate of nearly one bank per week. Because of this lifestyle, he was caught and imprisoned dozens of times. However, every single time he set foot in a prison, his very first thought was always how to escape. Imagine that throughout his thrill-filled career, he launched 30 escape attempts. 12 of them failed, while 18 succeeded. This means this man managed to break out of prison 18 times. No matter what kind of prison they put him in, or how maximum the security was, he always found a new way or a fresh idea to escape. Nothing could stop him, and no matter how grand the challenges ahead of him were, he always came up with clever and innovative solutions. In this story, we will focus specifically on his final escape attempt number 18, which stands as the most famous and daring operation he ever pulled off. Today's story revolves around a highly controversial man named Forrest Tucker. From his early childhood, Forrest immersed himself in the world of theft and crime. The main reason behind this, most likely, was his father, who abandoned the family when Forrest was just 6 years old. Left to grow up in a harsh, unforgiving environment, the young boy was naturally driven toward delinquency. By his teenage years, he was already committing petty thefts here and there. He was caught for the first time in 1936 at the age of 16 after attempting to steal a car. He was subsequently placed in a juvenile reformatory, a school-like facility aimed at rehabilitation. However, the 16-year-old Forrest decided he had no intention of staying. He executed his very first jailbreak at that tender age by tying a few bedsheets together and climbing out the window. It was a classic escape, straight out of a cartoon or an old TV show. From that moment on, this became his life, an existence entirely sustained by crime. Over time, he came to specialize in bank robberies, pulling off heists at a rate of nearly one bank per week. His robberies didn't rely on complex strategies. Instead, they were simple, direct armed holdups. He would walk into a bank, point a gun at the tellers, grab whatever cash he could, and flee. While the loot wasn't massive each time, the sheer frequency of his heists amassed him a fortune. This became his primary source of income. Whenever he needed cash, he simply went out and robbed a bank. For 60 years of his life, his existence spun in a continuous loop. He would rob, get caught, escape, and then return to rob again. Forrest grew up idolizing the infamous criminals he read about in stories. He relished playing the role of the hero outlaw, who defied law and order, living a life of absolute freedom without boundaries or restraints. Over his lifetime, he launched 30 escape attempts, 12 failed, while 18 succeeded. Some of these breakouts were wildly creative and insane, while others were relatively standard. The bizarre part was that he never set foot in a prison without his mind immediately racing to figure out how to break out. In fact, sometimes when he was just a few months or weeks away from his official legal release date, he would still try to escape. He didn't just escape because he wanted out. It was in his blood. He loved the thrill of defying the system, proving he was the strongest and smartest, and demonstrating that no cage could strip him of his freedom. Some of his most creative escape methods included hiding inside a laundry basket, digging an underground tunnel, cutting through the iron bars of his cell, using a rope to scale the prison wall, ambushing a guard, tying him up, and stealing his uniform to blend in, leaving a dummy head on his bed as a nighttime distraction, clinging to the underside of a bus to pass through the prison gates undetected. Granted, breaking out of prison back then was easier compared to today's highly sophisticated and advanced security systems, but escaping 18 times remains a mind-boggling, legendary feat. We now turn our focus to his 18th and final escape, by far his most complex and daring operation. In 1979, Forrest turned 59 years old. Despite his advanced age, his lifestyle remained unchanged. He was arrested following a botched armed robbery at a bank in Modesto, California. Following his trial, Forrest was sent to San Quentin State Prison, one of the toughest and most heavily guarded maximum security prisons in the state. At the time, it housed the largest death row population in the United States, filled with the worst of the worst, murderers, rapists, and highly dangerous criminals. This massive prison complex consisted of various buildings and specialized units, all surrounded by a towering, 6-meter-high stone wall. Inside, additional walls separated the various blocks and yards, overlooked by watchtowers manned by armed guards with sniper rifles, ready to shoot to kill at a moment's notice. However, the prison's layout had one fascinating quirk. The stone wall only enclosed 3 sides of the facility. The 4th side opened up directly onto the waters of San Francisco Bay. The prison administration viewed the water as an impenetrable natural barrier. The distance was vast and the currents treacherous, making swimming practically impossible. Even if a prisoner happened to be an Olympic-level swimmer, the tower guards would spot them instantly and open fire without hesitation, enforced by a strict prison policy that forbade warning shots. Despite the bloody ends of previous inmates who attempted to flee through the water, this did not stop Forrest from plotting the moment he arrived. Facing a 10-year sentence at nearly 60 years old, Forrest realized that if he served his full time, he would be 70 upon release, essentially at the end of his life. He refused to give away his final years to the state. An escape was non-negotiable. From his cell in the main building, Forrest began meticulously analyzing the prison layout. Keeping his eyes and ears wide open, he searched for a vulnerability until he learned about the industrial workshop. This workshop was located within the prison grounds but outside the main housing units, sitting directly on the shoreline of San Francisco Bay, the side open to the water without walls. Inmates worked in this massive, factory-like workshop to manufacture furniture, such as chairs and tables, for various government offices across the state of California. While it was guarded, the security there was nowhere near as tight as the main cell blocks. Forrest knew this workshop was his gateway to freedom, but getting transferred there was no easy task. His extensive record of armed robberies and serial escapes meant the administration would normally deny such a request instantly. This is when Forrest decided to play the age card. He wrote a poignant letter of appeal to the warden, pleading to be allowed to work in the shop. He claimed he was just an old man in his 60s whose only wish was to occupy his time constructively and serve out his sentence as a reformed model inmate. The administration fell for the ruse. Taking pity on his old age, they gave him the green light to join the workshop crew. It was his first major step toward freedom, though he still lacked a concrete plan. What Forrest didn't know at the time was that a pair of sharp eyes had been watching him closely from his very first day in the workshop. It belonged to an inmate named John Waller. John was an experienced criminal himself, having drifted through various prisons and successfully executed 3 jailbreaks of his own. While not quite on Forrest's level, he was no amateur. John knew all about Forrest's legendary track record, and he immediately deduced that this old man hadn't joined the workshop to turn over a new leaf. He was there to escape. Seizing the right moment, John approached Forrest. After striking up a brief conversation, John skillfully steered the topic toward prison breaks, asking bluntly, "Aren't you thinking about getting out of this place?" Without a moment's hesitation, Forrest confessed, "Of course. Joining this workshop is the only reason I'm here." John respected Forrest's blunt honesty and proposed a partnership. "What do you say we work together? I'm planning to escape too, and if we team up, our chances will be much better." Forrest welcomed the idea immediately, noting that he had already been looking for accomplices. From that point on, they became partners. Standing by the edge of the workshop, they would gaze out at the distant shoreline across San Francisco Bay. Forrest initially floated the idea of swimming across, but John shut it down immediately, citing the freezing waters, the lethal guards, and the certainty of drowning or being shot. Forrest already knew this, realizing exactly why the prison left that side without walls. That's when John dropped a bombshell and offered the ultimate solution. "I know how to build a boat, and this workshop has all the tools and materials we need." Forrest's eyes lit up with excitement. "You're a genius," he exclaimed. "That's the answer. If we build a boat, we can row to the other side with ease." The two agreed on the plan, despite how insane it sounded. How could they construct an entire boat right under the noses of the guards? How would they transport it to the water? And how would they evade the snipers in the watchtowers? The challenges seemed nearly impossible, but they were determined to tackle them one by one. During the daytime recreation periods when inmates were allowed out in the yards and sports fields, Forrest and John did the opposite. They would slip away undetected into John's cell to map out their strategy. Ultimately, they decided to build a small kayak-style boat powered by paddles. Because of his technical expertise, John took charge of the construction, with Forrest vowing to assist him with every ounce of strength he had. After extensive discussions regarding the finer details of the escape plan, Forrest felt a pressing need to introduce a third member to the team. They required someone to assist with constructing and navigating the boat, as well as keeping watch. If they were to work on the vessel, they needed a vigilant pair of eyes monitoring the surroundings. Forrest knew the perfect candidate, an old acquaintance named William McGurk. The two had previously collaborated on several armed robberies. McGurk was no stranger to prison breaks either. In 1970, he and a few fellow inmates executed a rather creative escape by intentionally clogging the prison toilets until they overflowed. Amidst the resulting chaos, they slipped away, though McGurk was eventually recaptured and later transferred to San Quentin. Given their history, Forrest trusted and respected McGurk, confident that he would guard their secret. He managed to convince John to bring him into the fold. When Forrest pitched the idea to McGurk, the latter accepted immediately, bringing their team to 3. Despite expanding their crew, several looming obstacles continued to trouble Forrest. How would they build the boat? How would they transport it from the workshop to the shore? How would they cross the bay without being spotted by the guards? Forrest spent several days scouting the workshop and its perimeter for a weakness until he uncovered a vital flaw. Guard Tower Number 4, which sat directly adjacent to the workshop, was completely abandoned. It turned out that due to budget cuts and a shortage of personnel, the prison administration had left it unmanned. They chose this specific tower under the assumption that the bayside was entirely secure, believing the freezing water acted as a natural barrier that would deter any escape attempt, famously viewing the coastline as an iron wall. This was Forrest's breakthrough. If they could transport the boat to the shoreline directly beneath Tower Number 4 without attracting notice, they could paddle out into the water and gain a significant distance before being spotted by the guard stationed at Tower Number 5, which faced the workshop from the opposite side. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. Before taking any other steps, they needed to build the vessel. Fortunately for them, they worked in the prison's furniture manufacturing workshop, meaning they had abundant access to tools and materials, and the clearance to use them provided they stayed inside the building. Over several days, the 3 inmates gathered the necessary supplies and hid them in a secluded, disused storage room at the very back of the workshop. This room was rarely entered, as it was typically reserved for surplus items. They stockpiled wood, formica, and plastic sheets without fearing detection, since the quantities they took were negligible compared to the workshop's massive inventory. Following a blueprint drawn up by John, they decided to construct a kayak measuring 4 meters in length. While relatively small for a boat, it was still a massive object to conceal in a tight space. John took charge of the construction, adopting an incredibly cautious tactic. He would slip into the room and work for no more than 2 minutes at a time, then immediately step out to check the perimeter, ensure no guards were approaching, and then return to resume his work for another 2 minutes. Additionally, either Forrest or McGurk stood guard outside the room at all times to signal John if danger neared. To make concealment easier, John built the boat in modular sections, with the sole exception of the hull's base, which had to remain a single, solid 4-meter piece. As the work progressed, the parts grew in number and size, turning the concealment process into a literal race against time before they were discovered. Meanwhile, Forrest assigned a new task to McGurk: steal one of the newspapers the guards brought in to read during their shifts. McGurk succeeded, and Forrest's initial goal was simply to check the weather forecast. The escape required a calm day free of heavy winds, as the bay connected directly to the Pacific Ocean, and its treacherous waves could easily smash their makeshift boat to pieces in moments. However, while flipping through the pages, Forrest stumbled upon a discovery far more valuable than a weather report. He found the ultimate solution to evading the guard towers. Forrest read an article announcing that in exactly 3 days, on August 9, 1979, the local yacht and boat club of San Francisco would host its famous annual event, the Bathtub Regatta. This was an international festival where hobbyists designed homemade watercraft, often utilizing actual bathtubs, and raced them across the bay. Crucially, the participating boats that day were all to be painted in the event's official colors: blue and yellow. Forrest was ecstatic. This was the perfect camouflage. They would paint their boat blue and yellow, blend in with the race participants, and even if the tower guards spotted them in the water, they wouldn't think twice. They would simply assume they were ordinary citizens enjoying the regatta. This news re-energized the 3 inmates. They accelerated their pace, knowing they had only 3 days left. John faced a slight hurdle regarding the oars, but after quick experimentation, he ingeniously crafted paddles using plastic pipes and lids. As for the rest of the boat parts, they wrapped them tightly in rolls of waterproof plastic wrap, the kind used in the workshop to protect furniture during transport, which provided a lightweight yet durable layer against the water. The calendar turned to August 8, 1979, the day before the escape. The boat was still a collection of disassembled parts. They had resolved to assemble and paint it on the actual day of the escape. It was a massive gamble. They had no way of knowing if the pieces would fit together perfectly or if the boat would even float. Everything rested entirely on John's calculations and craftsmanship. On the morning of August 9, 1979, hearts were racing. They assembled the parts, wrapping the entire structure in plastic wrap to bond the segments together and seal out the water, then coated it in blue paint with thin yellow accents using paints Forrest had smuggled from the workshop supply. The paint job wasn't just for the boat. It was for their clothes too. They took the winter coats and caps issued by the prison and painted them in the exact same blue and yellow scheme to complete their disguise. Because Forrest possessed the vanity of a master criminal who loved challenging and mocking the system, he insisted on leaving a parting signature. Using the paint, he boldly wrote the name Rub-a-Dub-Dub across the side of the boat, a direct nod to the famous nursery rhyme, Rub-a-Dub-Dub, 3 men in a tub. It was a blatant message of mockery left for the authorities to find. With the boat ready, they set their launch time for 2 p.m., aligning with the start of the regatta and optimal weather conditions. However, the greatest hurdle remained. How would they transport a 4-meter boat across an open, exposed 25-meter stretch of land from the workshop door to the shoreline without being seen? Any detection meant the guards were authorized to open fire and kill them on sight without warning. Forrest devised a high-risk plan capitalizing on a habit he noticed in the prison's delivery truck driver. The driver regularly left his truck unlocked and unattended, often with the keys inside and the engine running, while he went inside the workshop to chat with the guards. Since Forrest and John were routinely tasked with unloading this truck, their presence around it never raised suspicion. The execution began. John slipped into the driver's seat, started the truck, and began driving it very slowly along the coastline parallel to the workshop, creating a moving barrier. Meanwhile, Forrest and McGurk hoisted the plastic-wrapped boat, which from a distance looked like a large wardrobe or a piece of furniture, and moved swiftly behind the truck, using it as a shield. The loud hum of machinery and general noise of the workshop provided excellent acoustic cover. In a matter of moments, they successfully crossed the 25-meter expanse and reached the low-lying shoreline, which naturally obscured them from view. They were now directly beneath the vacant guard tower number 4. John quickly parked the truck back in its place and sprinted to join his companions. The 3 men donned their painted coats and caps and launched the boat into the water. Initially, it floated. Forrest climbed in first, causing the boat to sink slightly. McGurk followed, submerging it deeper. Finally, John climbed aboard, and the waterline rose to the absolute rim of the vessel. It was barely maintaining buoyancy. There was no turning back. McGurk sat at the bow and John at the stern to paddle with their makeshift plastic oars, while Forrest sat in the middle to maintain balance and prevent capsizing. As they moved, water began spilling over the sides, and they realized the boat was failing. Forrest yelled, "Paddle as fast as you can. Just get us out of the prison's perimeter." Their frantic, violent rowing was bound to draw attention, but they managed to break past the immediate prison boundaries and enter the open bay. It was at this moment that they entered the field of vision of the guard stationed at Tower Number 5. The guard spotted them, but thanks to their blue and yellow boat and matching outfits, he assumed they were just late arrivals for the bathtub regatta. The guard picked up his megaphone and called out to them, asking if they were all right or if they needed assistance. Terror gripped the trio, but McGurk quickly saved the day. He shouted back, "We're fine, thank you." He gestured toward his bare wrist as if checking a watch and added, "We're just late to meet our group and trying to catch up." The guard believed the story entirely, wished them luck, and let them go on their way. A dramatic scene that felt straight out of a cartoon. They paddled with everything they had until they neared the opposite shore. At that exact moment, the boat filled completely with water and began to sink under their weight. The three plummeted into the water, clinging to the submerged hull for buoyancy until they finally scrambled onto dry land. Exhausted, freezing, and utterly soaked. The men had never planned for what would happen after the escape. Their entire focus had been consumed by the escape itself. As they stood shivering on the shore, John and McGurk turned to Forrest, looking to him as their leader, and asked, "What do we do now?" Forrest replied bluntly and without hesitation, "We made it out. Now it's every man for himself. Goodbye." With that, he bolted into the distance. John and McGurk stood in stunned silence at this abrupt betrayal, but they quickly realized the reality of their situation. Splitting up, they ran in opposite directions. Back at the prison, several hours passed before anyone noticed their absence. It wasn't until the 4 p.m. evening roll call, when inmates were returned to their cells from the yards and facilities, that guards realized 3 prisoners were missing. An emergency lockdown was instantly declared. A massive search began inside the complex given the prison's size. But word soon reached the warden that the guard at Tower Number 5 had seen 3 individuals on a boat whom he mistook for civilians. The warden immediately realized the truth, escalating the emergency and notifying all law enforcement and security agencies. It was the first successful escape in the history of San Quentin. While combing the surrounding areas, police quickly recovered the sunken boat and the mocking "Rub-a-dub-dub" inscription, and its photograph was splashed across local newspapers. The story became a massive media sensation, causing immense embarrassment to the prison administration and state authorities. Law enforcement deployed every available officer, expanding the search radius day after day, week after week, to no avail. Eventually, the official manhunt was called off. As for the fates of the 3 fugitives, Forrest Tucker, the mastermind drawing on his vast experience, this was his 18th successful jailbreak. He knew survival meant leaving the state of California entirely. He did exactly that and successfully vanished. William McGurk committed a fatal error by staying in California. Just 2 months later, October 1979, police set a trap near his girlfriend's apartment and arrested him in the city of San Rafael, a mere 30 kilometers from the prison. John Waller managed to stay on the run for 8 months before being apprehended in April 1980 in the city of Gilroy, roughly 150 kilometers from San Quentin. A stunning legal twist. During John and McGurk's trial for the escape, the prosecution presented a weak, flaw-ridden case. To the embarrassment of the state and the fortune of the defendants, the jury, made up of ordinary citizens, was so captivated by the clever, non-violent nature of the escape that they refused to find them guilty. Consequently, both men were returned to prison solely to serve out their original sentences, completely dodging the additional 5 to 10 years normally tacked on for prison escapes. The end of the legend. Meanwhile, Forrest Tucker continued moving from city to city and state to state, staying one step ahead of the law. In 1998, nearly 20 years after his grand escape, he settled down in his home state of Florida. He married a woman without ever revealing his true identity, convincing her he was a wealthy investment banker. He funded their comfortable lifestyle through the only trade he truly knew: robbing banks.